O'Connor Show. At AM 630.
Yeah, we're going to give you highlights of the president's speech today, which really was a barn buster. It's in the 4 o'clock hour. In fact, Kurt Schlichter is going to join me. We're going to give you our running commentary on that speech. That'll be fun. Also, Ambassador John Bolton joins us in the 4 o'clock hour. James O'Keefe and Grover Norquist in the 5 o'clock hour. A whole lot more to go here with our live coverage of CPAC Day 2 live from National Harbor. Right now, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, he is the president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy and author of Battle for the Soul of Islam. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be with you, Larry. It's awesome to be with you in person.
Yes, I know. Often on the phone, but now in person. And sadly, you know, we often have you as a guest after some horrible atrocity has happened, a terrible terrorist attack. So it's great to sort of not have that as part of the conversation and instead talk about the very real, constructive issues that you're engaged in here at CPAC. You had a panel yesterday, and I know you have one tomorrow, right?
Today.
Today. Later today.
20 minutes at 4 o'clock.
So let's do a quick preview of that. You're talking about basically what our policies should be in the Middle East, and obviously specifically with regard to Muslim-majority countries.
Yeah, absolutely. It's called Rising Tides and Warring Tribes. It's really about, you know, how do we get out of this cycle? We've actually now rebooted. The last administration ignored everything, if not took the side of the Khomeinist, side of the Islamists with the Brotherhood. We took century back in American progress. Now at least we're sort of reestablishing the Arab allies. And I think now that we finally have a president that has moved us beyond, what do we call it? Is it Islam? Is it not? And we spent 8 years wasting our time with diagnosis. We finally made the diagnosis. The American public is ready to go on to treatment now. And what is the treatment? We need to stop the whack-a-mole. As you said, every 3 or 4 weeks, God forbid, an attack happens. We pay attention to it, and 4 days later we go on to something else, and there's no strategic. It's sort of like drug use. You pay attention to the drunk driver that does something or the heroin addict that kills somebody, but you don't deal with the substance and the addiction process. And the intoxicant in this global problem is simple. It's global jihad. It's the Islamic State concept. Islam is at that time in history in which the theocrats need to be defeated. And there's no better president to do that than somebody who's fighting the establishment. And the establishment globally in our faith is the Islamic theocrats.
But Dr. Jasser, as a Muslim man, when you started American Islamic Forum for Democracy and what you wrote about in Battle for the Soul of Islam, you have been pushing for reform. Like every great religion before it, you have been saying Islam needs a fundamental reformation process. How does that occur, and is it the theocrats that have to be defeated? And forgive me my ignorance, I don't know how that process begins within the religion, the way that it is structured.
Well, I think look at our own history in the West. I don't think in my lifetime we're going to have necessarily the theological reformation that's going to take new books on Sharia law that is commensurate with modernity. But what will happen in our generation is a John Locke, a James Madison, a Thomas Jefferson, Muslims that reject theocracy, that can begin to look at liberty and reason-based law, believe in a society under God but not under a particular faith, because every faith has multiple interpretations. So America needs to start to get in the game, take sides, not get internally in our theological debate, but take the sides of the liberals. In Iran, the streets are filled with hundreds of thousands of women and men who want freedom against the theocrats. There's no better security interest for America, no safer way to reject their nuclear aspirations of the Khomeinists than to help the revolution there. Same thing in Egypt and Syria, across the region. We need to support those who share our values, which I believe is a majority. While the Islamists control 95% of the establishment, top down, the bottom up is probably 60% anti-Islamists who reject theocracy.
It sounds to me like you're saying the beginning of this process that will ultimately, hopefully, lead to a reformation of Islam is just the fundamental separation of mosque and state, basically.
And I think it's very germane to America that we form a commission on radical Islamism. That's what was the point of my talk yesterday on the main stage here at CPAC. It was basically to say, listen, America was founded by folks who rejected theocracy. You don't have to be experts in Islam. No one's violating the religious freedom of Muslims. But we need to start at every whole of society approach, an immigration, DOD policy, homeland security, foreign policy, State Department policy. In academia, are we holding professors and media pundits accountable to articulating the ideologies of Muslims that are compatible with America versus those that are not compatible.
When you do your very important work with your organization, I want to say it again, American Islamic Forum for Democracy, when you do your important work here in America, and also you do speak overseas and try to work with Muslims overseas, has it been hindered by the president's policy with regard to immigration and travel from those certain Muslim majority countries who have sadly been involved in so much terrorism? We were told that was going to alienate Muslims everywhere.
I'm glad you asked me that. That is absurd. It hasn't. I mean, they laugh at the fact that comments about restricting immigration, because you look at their countries, they are airtight drums. Saudi Arabia hasn't taken one Syrian refugee. These countries are autocratic, and they're laughing at the fact that America wants to protect itself. I mean, my family's in Damascus and Aleppo, war zones right now. They're worried when somebody comes from a neighborhood next door, whether it's ISIS, Al-Qaeda, they don't know, just from down the street. So it makes sense if you have a border of a country that you have ideological vetting, that they come for merit, not because of simply to check a box of diversity, or because they're related to someone in America. They could be ideologues very different from their cousins that happen to be here. And most Middle Easterners scratch their heads saying, we can't believe America's even having this debate.
Yeah. Many of us can't believe it either.
Or they'll use it in their propaganda to say we're anti-Muslim and just exploit it.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, by the way, you have a podcast now called Reform This. I like that. And where can people find that? At your website?
It's at iTunes and at SoundCloud and also at Blaze Radio.
Oh, great. Well, don't get into the radio business, all right? We don't need more of that. There's plenty of that going on. In your book, Battle for the Soul of Islam, and I do recommend people read it, you talk very much about your community, about the Muslim community, and what you had to deal with when you spoke out, when you said, we need to look at ourselves here. What can we do, what we non-Muslims in America do to help that conversation along? Or is this something that just Muslims have to work out with themselves? Because I want to be a part of that conversation, if I can.
The worst thing you could do is say we can do this alone. Muslims will not wake up unless we're treated as adults. Right now we're being treated with this bigotry of low expectations where we say, leave them alone. It doesn't matter if the women are at the back of the mosque, if they don't have the rights in their homes that we expect them to give their family members. It doesn't matter. We need to hold our communities accountable, and we need to protect reformers. I can't tell you. I mean, right now we're talking about what the security guard did at Parkland. We're talking about how the signals the FBI ignored. I can tell you hair-raising stories of signals where young girls call in and they're ignored, or spouses will call in saying they're being abused by their immigrant husband from Iraq or Syria, and they're ignored. So this is the issue.
Because the assumption is, that's just their culture. They do things differently.
And the agent or whoever doesn't want to be perceived as being anti-Muslim. All the warning signs that happened with Nidal Hassan. He was carrying around a card at Walter Reed Army that said "Soldier of Allah," and it was ignored. So these are the same things. We need to pay attention to protect Muslim reformers, Muslim spokespeople, leaders that are speaking out, so that they feel not only encouraged, but that they feel that this laboratory, and people underestimate the power of American culture. While look at the people in the streets in Iran and Egypt. They're not in the streets here because most of my colleagues aren't worried about Islamists taking over the government here. So the motivation is over there, yet the laboratory to do the work is here. They don't have the laboratory in Iran and Iraq to do the work that I'm doing. So Americans need to realize that we need to engage those 3 or 4 million Muslims here to use the laboratory, the blessings we have in America, to begin to do the work that the people on the streets in Iran and Egypt want to do.
You are an incredibly articulate person for your cause, which is reform within the Islamic community, and you've been trying ever since 9/11. You weren't in this business. You're a doctor.
No,
I mean, you're not, a lot of people are doctors because they, you're an actual doctor, right?
Yeah.
You're a dentist or
internal medicine.
Internal medicine. There you go.
Yeah.
But you took this on as your life's mission after 9/11, after the rise of Islamist terrorism. Can I ask you, because you're obviously thoughtful, you're obviously well read, you know your religion, you know your politics. In the 8 years of the Obama administration, how many times were you invited to an event there to participate in a conversation about these things?
Not only zero. When we asked to have, we didn't demand that the Islamists be displaced. We said we wanted a seat at the table. The Islamists that were around the inner circle in Obama's administration they created firewalls that prevented reformers, despite all the media that we had. And many of us reformers that are part of the Muslim reform movement were on Fox and CNN and elsewhere. We would mention it. And you got Zeki Berzinji. I can give you names of Muslims that were in the White House liaison offices that intentionally created firewalls so that only the Islamists would have a monolithic voice. And to them, diversity of Muslim community was about ethnic diversity. Do we have an Egyptian Muslim, a Pakistani, and a European one? Diversity is really ideological diversity. Did they have not only the Islamists, but do they have liberals, gay Muslims, feminist Muslims?
Yeah.
All of those that were not Islamists were excluded from the White House. And that's from a liberal, far-left president.
We're only supposed to ask the questions that we already know the answer to, right, when we're doing an interview. And I didn't know. I assumed that at least you were to go to some event, you would be to some event. I shouldn't be surprised that President Obama didn't invite you once. Well, you always have an open invitation here.
Thank you.
You have to go. You've got a panel starting in like 15 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, American Islamic Forum for Democracy, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for all you do, Larry.